Thank you, Lee, for this very kind introduction, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to give this keynote. And I am Professor of Business Ethics, as has just been mentioned, but I am also, at the moment, setting up a new institute which is called the TUM Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. And it will be an independent research institute at my university. We will establish interdisciplinary tandem groups between always one person from the technical side, from the engineering and informatics, for example, and one from the other side, so being ethics or law or social sciences. This institute, which I'm saying here up front, is being financed by Facebook, by the company. So I'm not financed by Facebook, I'm financed by the Bavarian government, but this institute is financed by them, but we have no obligations towards the company. It's a research gift that comes with it. We have an independent advisory board to, advise us in the selection of projects, for example, to guarantee the independence, and it will be launched officially in October. And I'm saying this here because not just because of this institute, but because I believe we need to come to new ways of dealing with business, with the big companies in the sector. And of course, there's a lot of critical discussion about this, but also this is something we need to talk about, actually, and not just be silent about it and see what we can achieve in terms, for example, of privacy and other issues, and data governance in these fields. So we will be focusing on these areas, which are certainly defined in a very broad sense: safety, security, and reliability, trust and privacy, fairness, biases in inclusion, transparency, explicability, and sustainability and accountability, governance, responsibility, and values in the broader sense. And we have a call for research proposals out there at the moment. So having said that, what are the ethical issues of AI and autonomous decision making? And I should say, when I talk about AI, because my institute is about ethics in AI, but of course AI here in the sense for this conference also includes questions of big data. I don't want to go into that area, what should be defined as big data, what should be defined as AI, because I want to talk about something else. Otherwise, I wouldn't have much time. So, as we see, AI solutions are already present in many industries, and to name but a few, and some of these have already been mentioned, of course, here during the course of this day: telemedicine, care robots, big data solutions, Internet of Things, smart grids, and not least autonomous driving. And I believe there are a number of opportunities in this technology, and with opportunities I just mean not just efficient, not just in terms of economic benefits, but in terms of ethical opportunities, such as telemedicine could address major problems of rural depopulation. And provide services in areas where they have not been available to that extent, at least. And reaching patients in rural areas, in remote areas, will be one of the interesting benefits. Or the care robots can address the major problem of aging society, and also about the shortage of qualified healthcare personnel. I find this question of how to deal with care robots a particularly interesting one, because intuitively many people think, well, shouldn't we have more human healthcare personnel? And what we see actually in some studies that have been conducted, especially in countries like Japan, but also in Germany to some extent, that many people, especially aging people, regard it actually as more humane to have robots assisting them in their daily routines, and then having actually more time or leisure to talk to human beings in a quite different non-healthcare setting. Of course, the question of big data, which is discussed extensively in many good presentations in this conference, is the question: can we improve decision making actually by relying on more and better information? And that might be in many ways a benefit for ethics. One that I like to mention always is that the city of Oslo reduced their street lighting energy consumption by 62% using big data, which I find quite impressive. And of course, other solutions we can address here as well, like predictive crime mapping. Within the Internet of Things, the optimization of physical environments can not just lead to more comfort or productivity or time gains, but it might also lead to more rational decision making, actually. Is it better to rely on more information that comes from many sources than just relying on what some human being thinks should be the case? Then we have the smart grids. I think a very important technology to address the problem of globally increasing energy demand. And I think we cannot even start addressing this problem without thinking of these technologies. And finally, there's the autonomous driving. I think this is an area where the ethical benefits are very clear. If we manage to reduce the high fatality rates that we have, so in Germany we have around 3,000 people getting killed each year by cars, and more than 90% have been caused chiefly by human errors. So if we can substantially reduce these rates, and there is some hope that autonomous driving can do that, we could save many lives and avoid many injuries. I would like to focus a little more on examples from the healthcare sector, because I believe this is a very important area where big data AI solutions can help a lot. This is also one area that will be addressed within the focuses of my new institute. So especially in the areas of cancer, cancer diagnostics, neurology, cardiology, these systems can help reduce errors on the one hand, and be, of course, more quick to find the right or better improved information about diseases. So there's a lot of statistics that you can come up with and say what would be the total number of money to be saved actually in medical expenses by, for example, using machine learning in early detection of diseases, in the treatment of diseases, and prediction in outcomes. There is one very nice example that I like to quote a lot these days. It has just come out with the National Cancer Institute 2019 in the US, that these systems are vastly better than any human doctor in identifying pre-cancer. This is something that probably was not expected to that degree. So they are not only faster, but they are even really better than even expert reviewers. And this was a study done on many thousands of cases. So I am sure in the future there will be even more of these studies showing the benefits. And finally, a last benefit that I just learned about is that chatbots are being used, in this case in Pakistan, for helping young women to ask questions about reproductive health. In a surrounding where it is comfortable for them to address these issues, and otherwise they would not have this surrounding to do that. And so addressing a taboo subject, basically, and so AI in this context would help to empower people actually, and apparently also has, in some cases, in emergency cases, already helped to get medical attention. Okay, I have now talked a lot about the opportunities and the benefits, but of course, there are challenges as well. So, if we sum up these in several larger points, so one would be we depend on the accuracy of technical systems. And there's the danger of technical errors. In fields like telemedicine, of course, you need to be very precise there, but also in autonomous driving, where split-second decisions need to be taken. Also, there's a large fear of once autonomous decisions being entirely or to a very large extent being shifted towards technology and machines. Another one is the another big point is the vulnerability against cyber attacks, even the danger of cyber wars. Then we have, of course, the big aspect that is being addressed here at this conference, the privacy issues and danger of misuse of data. And there we have the GDPR, but also other governance in Singapore and other places that is there to address these problems. And finally, the digital literacy is still a major problem, depending on the country. So from country to country, it's very different. It is a major problem in Germany, I have to say, I have to admit, and it's we should do more. To get to the same level that other countries, I just learned about Uruguay, and others are already there to some extent. Of course, then if you get to a more concrete level, we have problems in areas like deepfakes, software that generates or edits video material. We just had this video by Nancy Pelosi, I think, that was apparently changed, altered a bit, and big ethical issue there. Another one that I learned about is that you can now generate fake fingerprints using special software, and of course that could be employed in many ways in order to unlock, for example, your smartphone and others. There is the problem about fake fake bots. Actually is the wrong word. Either you are a bot or you are a fake. But bots acting like human beings in social media. There's a colleague of mine at TUM who is especially into finding out what is a bot, what is not a bot on Twitter. So this will be a huge issue, is already, but will be in the future. And of course, the preventing crime. So you can also use the technology in order to automate blackmailing. So if you don't have the time to do traditional kind of blackmailing, you can automate it now. And so on. Just to mention some very recent cases that we've had, and some of these you may be familiar with, but some of these you may not. For example, Twitter has recently blocked, in the German context, several accounts which came as a sort of surprise, so which were not the accounts that you would normally associate with. So just in May this year, the newspaper Jüdische Allgemeine was blocked because of an interview by an Israeli ambassador. There was really nothing special, but just some keywords popped up, and so the software actually blocked it. I think it was unblocked the next day, but still was blocked for some time. And the same happened with the German politician Safsan Chebli, who was blocked after a post just that included the name Mohammed. So also nothing special actually. But so it was blocked, I think, just for a couple of hours. But it was there. And how did that come about? We don't really know. There's another case that you are probably familiar with, the hiring software used by Amazon that turned out to have an inherent bias against women. Also, the smart pricing mechanisms, I mean, Airbnb is a prominent case, but there are others as well that actually turn out to widen ethnic gaps in coming up with certain inherent or even strengthened biases in there. So these are some examples that we need to address in order to be able to use the technology in a good way. So that's where we have. So we have the opportunity to enable human self-realization, but on the other hand, we might devalue human skills. We might enhance human agency, but also reduce human responsibility, and we might increase social capabilities, but on the other hand, reduce human control. What is the public opinion? So to give you some figures, some recent ones, very briefly again, this was a survey conducted in the US, published this year. Actually, it turned out that there's strong support of AI solutions by 41%, which I think, at least I found quite surprising. To me, well, maybe it's in Germans are more critical of many things, but it looked to me like at least the media reception of these systems is more critical than actually the opinion, the public opinion is. You might cite more studies here, but when you find what are usually being regarded as the most prioritized government challenges. So the violation of privacy is certainly one of the most pressing things for many people. So endangering civil liberties. A second one, AI being used to spread fake and harmful content online. Something which has been addressed in the European setting is in Germany, for example, by the hate speech law and so on. Recently, well, there's also a huge discussion about that. We could talk about that in the discussion. Cyber attacks and some more. So respondents here again in the same study rated that all challenges, these challenges are important and over 50% likely to affect a large number of people in the next 10 years. And now, which organization do people think they trust most? And they trust most university researchers and the US military. So again, this was a survey conducted in the US. I do not know about similar studies being done in Europe. Probably they are, or China, or wherever. I don't know. Least trusted is actually Facebook. The other companies are doing much better. So companies, the big tech companies, digital tech companies are in general fairly well trusted, except for Facebook because of the scandal, of course. And however, there's no organization for which the average respondent said he or she had a fair amount of confidence. So most trusted is still relatively low degree of trust. What can we do to address these problems? And of course, this has been mentioned here again. So what are possible principles for an ethical AI, a trustworthy AI, for example? We need, and I think trust is the key concept here. It has been mentioned in the opening panel a couple of times and in other presentations that I attended here. Which definitely we need to respect fundamental rights. We need to come to terms with finding the right rules. Maybe at some point regulations, although this is a separate discussion, I think. These solutions should be robust. I think this is very important, should be robust and not just something that you do ad hoc and is vulnerable to changes. And we also need to find redress mechanisms. I think this is a very key concept. So the question of liability, who will be held liable in the case that something goes wrong. And I will give an example slightly later on. We have seen in the past 1 or 2 years a number of initiatives proposing principles for ethical AI. So the OECD was mentioned here, which just now came up with the OECD principles on AI, which have been adopted, to my knowledge, by 36 members and OECD members and some other countries. So that saying that AI should be fair, transparent, and accountable, and companies need to disclose certain things about their systems and others. We have other initiatives by the IEEE, for example, which you are probably aware of, the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, and their concept of ethically aligned design. Again, here human rights are in the center of the general principles, but also well-being, transparency is a key concept, accountability again, and some others. So the idea is also here to come up with some certificates, some ethics certificate and a program in this regard for AI systems. What I find interesting is often when I go to conferences, it's said, well, if we don't do that, that sometime at some point the Chinese will take over, and of course they do not care at all. This is certainly not true. So I was just a couple of weeks ago at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, where they organized an international dialogue on AI, and it was most of the partners and the attendants came from US, UK, and China. And one thing that Chinese made clear, and I cannot say I have checked all of this, but we certainly need to take into account that there are regulations on privacy in China. They may not be as coordinated or as monolithic as the GDPR or others, but other countries do not have that at all. As well, and so there is a cybersecurity law. There's a Consumer Rights Protection Act. There's what they call Ninth Amendment of criminal law, and several decisions by the National People's Congress. As I said, no unified framework, certainly, but I think it should be looked. We should have a look into that, and certainly, as someone said on the panel before. In China, they did not have privacy as a concept, and in former times there was no talk of privacy at all. And now it has improved. So the lady there said she does not read her daughter's emails, but her parents used to read her diaries and her journals that she was writing when she was a kid. So this is definitely something that is that we learn in the societal context. So, and there is, it's not the case that these questions are not on the agenda at all. To just briefly cite, okay, the UK Digital Competition Expert Panel you're familiar with. Don't need to bring that. But what I find interesting, for example, that the facial recognition was mentioned on the first panel, I think, and San Francisco has been the first major city, to my knowledge, to ban public facial recognition by the police just last month, actually. We should see how that and whether that will last and what that implies. But I think it's an interesting move, and there are a couple of other international initiatives. The GDPR is I just bring it up here because I think it's sometimes misunderstood. The GDPR is not just an instrument for blocking certain things and avoiding some things to get implemented, but it is actually, it is meant to enable people to freely trade their data. This is something sometimes misunderstood, I think, probably not to experts, but to many people in the wider public, especially in Germany, it's not perceived that way. So that the right of the protection of personal data is not an absolute right. Yeah? So you can actually, so you need to balance it against other rights, and you can trade your data. So it's not that you are not allowed to train your database. For many, that might be obvious, but to the wider public, as I said, it's often not the case. And we have had these two coordinated effects on the European level. I was a part of this one, the AI for People, which is ongoing actually. So we came up with the first framework for ethics of AI, and we now are in the process of launching publicly next month actually the governance of AI paper. And the high-level expert group, of course, took up the 5 key ethics principles that we came up with and produced this very important report. And the 5 principles, of course, the first 4 are quite traditional ones actually, so it's not too special for ethics, beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy and justice. What do these mean in the AI context? So it's very, very high level. But I think the last one is quite interesting, the explicability criterion or principle, and we are also in my institute now looking to see what does that mean in practice. What does it mean for a system or for an algorithm to be called explicable? So what does it require from data scientists, and what skills do they need to learn in order to be able to do that? Okay. So there are, of course, certain technical methods for doing that. So like what would be the architecture of trustworthy AI? I think that will be a key question that is not to be answered in a simple way, of course. Documenting decisions and making it explainable, this kind of XAI research that we see now, I think that will be very important, and I think it will be, you cannot even separate it from the kind of informatics research that people are doing. So we have technical methods and non-technical methods like these that have been mentioned all in the high-level expert group's report. I think it's very important also to see that there are non-technical methods. So we need to collaborate on these questions, so between the technical and the non-technical people, like standardization, codes of conduct, education and awareness, and others. So that is the model that they came up with. There is a second approach which I was part of a couple of years ago, and that was the first ethics committee for autonomous driving, where we produced in 2017 a national report for the German Ministry of Transport, a report of 20 ethical guidelines for automated and connected traffic. I think this is very interesting in many respects because it addresses a number of questions that are also very pressing for AI systems. Like one of them is the liability question. So we decided here to shift liability in those cases, in those instances where the car was driving autonomously to the manufacturer of cars. So or maybe the company that is running the software, but so away from the human driver, away from the individual. And I think this is inevitable in many other AI systems as well. And I think probably the most controversial rule that we came up with, but I just want to highlight here, is this one. Because much of the literature on autonomous driving, as you are aware of, deals with these questions of unavoidable accident situations, so the dilemma situations that, for example, the moral machine group at the MIT obviously is dealing with a lot. And we are saying here in these situations, a general programming to reduce the overall number of personal injuries may be justifiable. But there must not be any distinction based on personal features, such as age in particular. So if that would be doable, it might be doable technically, eventually, but there are some people who are saying we should distinguish on the basis of personal characteristics. And I think this is not possible to do. I mean, for constitutional reasons. But there is this discussion. I don't think we can, because they are saying our intuitions would rather favor running over the older person than the child. But what do we do with that? So even if we have those intuitions, can we program that into a software? No, I don't think we can do that. It would be, for many legal reasons, not feasible at all. But I think that needs to be said. I think there are a number of lessons to be learned from the autonomous driving example, and on that basis, actually, so it was ethical guidelines, and on that basis, a European process is underway to also get to eventually to some harmonization of rules for autonomous driving, because otherwise, at least in Europe, if we don't do that, we will have many different kinds of regulations, and so we will have to adjust your settings when you cross the border. We'll see. Hopefully we can avoid that. I'm coming to the last part of my talk because I initially said I am a business ethicist. And I believe that is a perspective that in all the discussions on data ethics and AI ethics is sometimes, not all, sometimes overlooked, because we need to come to terms with the fact that it will be companies, and in many cases large companies, that will be implementing those guidelines or norms or regulations that we come up with. And one discussion that we have right now a lot is there sufficient competition among those companies? There's the discussion about breaking up some of the big players in the field. So some people are calling for it. I just mentioned that we need to look at this issue carefully. We have certainly direct competition in many ways, in many markets, like in the case of mobile devices, we do not have that problem, or in a hunt for user data, if you want, or in the case of autonomous cars, we don't know who will be the leaders. But in other cases, of course, we need to see what is the question about Google versus Microsoft, or Amazon. There's a lot of talk about, is Amazon already some kind of monopoly? I think that should be looked at carefully, whether it's really a monopoly or whether it's several big players. But this is something we need to look into, and that is clearly a business ethics problem. I will give one more example. That is the question of ride-sharing companies. And in many parts of the world, this is not a problem anymore. So we have not just one company. We have Uber, we have Lyft, we have Grab in Singapore and many other places. But in Germany, for example, but also in other European countries, still a big discussion about that. And I think it is, in reality, it is often taxi drivers' associations that are lobbying against these companies. So whatever you think about Uber, and if you find Uber very acceptable or nice company, you should also take into account that these associations are lobbying against them. So, of course, a fair playing ground should be established, but then these companies should not be blocked from entering markets altogether. And further examples would be, for example, so problems or ethical problems here from a business ethics point of view, releasing an autonomous car before software has been adequately tested. So we have had these problems. We probably will always have some of these problems. So you cannot, through testing, avoid all the errors, of course. But we will have to see what would be the redress procedure then, and that's quite important. Or bending data protection rules in order to gather more data than competitors, or being sloppier with data security. And is regulation the only way of addressing these problems? from a business ethics perspective, I think there are others as well, such as the concept of creating shared value, which has been proposed by Porter and Kramer a couple of years ago. They suggest actually having a new look at what companies do in the very broad sense. And they say that these companies, or companies in the general sense, produce shared value. Shared value, which they produce value, of course, for themselves, for their shareholders, but also at the same time for others. They suggest not splitting these and seeing these as two aspects, like we do something for the shareholders or for the stakeholders in the wider sense. No, it's just one thing. So two sides of the same coin, so to speak. And I think this is a very useful framework. At the same time, enhancing competitiveness of a company while simultaneously enhancing economic and social conditions in your community, or in the very wider community, actually, so not just necessarily the local one. And there is an economic rationale behind it. This is not just wishful thinking, like, please, big companies, be nice. But especially, I like to say that business ethics and CSV is kind of risk management. And I think we in the AI and big data sector we already see that there are lots of risks, especially in terms of reputational risk. You don't, if possible, you don't want to endanger your brand value. And for example, Facebook, I think, has learned that the hard way, but also others like Volkswagen and other companies. And but it's not just about reputational value, but also, of course, about penalties that these companies face. And so Volkswagen case, they are paying around more than 25 billion euro. And even so, this is even for a company like Volkswagen, this is very substantial. So if you can avoid that by using business ethics as a kind of early warning system, I think this is a very interesting perspective. So, and there is a systematic, there are many studies that show this actually, that actively taking on ethical responsibility and without changes in regulation, in hard regulation, can help companies in raising profits, securing the capability for innovation, improving risk management, improving market positions, consumer satisfaction, and motivating employees. So I think there is much to be learned from this perspective. Now, finally, to the question of regulation. What should we do? And a very good solution has been made by Jean Tirole, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, just last year, where he said, I will just sum this up, the most important thing that he said, we need to develop a participative antitrust. I think this is a very useful concept, because just breaking up companies might not achieve our goals. So if we want to achieve more on better privacy, do we achieve that by breaking up the big companies? That is very doubtful. It might be, but it's far from clear. And so this kind of participative antitrust, in which industry or other partners propose regulations and the authorities respond to it. Of course, they do not regulate themselves, but working together with them in order to find sensible solutions, I think, is a way to go. These companies, they want legal certainty. They are looking for legal certainty, but it's not easy to get. And we need, of course, to have societal players, civil society. We need expert groups and others in there to help. So I think this concept of participative antitrust is quite a sensible one. We have seen a number of initiatives during the past years, some of which I have mentioned, expert groups like in the high-level expert group in Europe. We have academic centers, we have national AI strategies from many countries now, and and others as well. So to conclude, I believe the trust in AI and big data is the key issue here. We need, on the one hand, we need more research, we need more data in order to assess algorithmic impact. We need also to rethink many issues. So one of the issues that is on the table in many discussions is that human beings will be replaced by machines. But this will not be the perspective in the next years or even decades. It will be a kind of human-machine collaboration instead of AI replacing us. But and that, if we can get that perspective across, I think it changes many of the discussions. I believe we need guidelines and frameworks for ethical AI, not just the high-level abstract ones that we have seen, but we need also more concrete ones and more down-to-earth solutions, I believe, and tools for companies that help them follow ethical frameworks and establish trust. So thank you very much for your attention.